The alarm bells rang through the crystal towers of Velara Prime like screams of the dying. Ambassador Rila pressed her blue-scaled hands against the cold metal of the viewing window and watched the emergency lights flash red across the capital city below. Her people were running through the streets, carrying what few belongings they could grab before the next wave of attacks came. 3 days ago, the Korath Empire had sent their ultimatum to every world in the Velani Federation. Submit to their rule or face complete destruction. The message was short and brutal, delivered by dropping the severed heads of Velani diplomats onto the steps of their own embassy. The Korath did not believe in mercy or negotiation. They believed only in conquest and death. Rila turned away from the window as her aide, a young Velani named Chris, rushed into the room with a datapad clutched in his trembling hands. His normally bright green eyes were dim with fear and exhaustion. Like everyone else in the government, he had not slept since the attacks began. "Ambassador, we just received word from the outer colonies," Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "New Haven is gone. They bombed it from orbit until nothing was left but glass and ash. 20 million people, Ambassador. 20 million. Of our people are dead." Rila closed her eyes and felt something break inside her chest. New Haven had been a peaceful farming world, home to families who had never hurt anyone. They grew food that fed half the Federation. Their children went to schools where they learned art and music and poetry. Now they were all dead, killed by an empire that saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. "What about our fleet?" Rila asked, though she already knew the answer from the look on Chris's face. Admiral Vex tried to defend the colony with everything we had. 30 ships. Against their war fleet. Chris swallowed hard. "We found pieces of our ships floating in space." The Korath didn't even slow down. They just kept firing until there was nothing left to shoot at. Rila walked back to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair. The Velani had always been a peaceful people. They were traders and artists, farmers and teachers. Their weapons were designed for hunting wild animals, not fighting wars against species that treated genocide like a game. The Korath had been preparing for this war for decades, while the Velani had been writing songs and painting pictures. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Intelligence says their main fleet will reach our core worlds in 6 days. Maybe 7 if we're lucky." Chris set the datapad on her desk with shaking hands. "The other members of the Federation are too far away to help, and their own fleets are too small anyway. We're alone, Ambassador." Alone, the word echoed in Rila's mind like a death sentence. The Velani Federation had always relied on diplomacy and trade agreements to solve their problems. They had no allies with strong enough militaries to stand against the Korath Empire. Most of the galaxy was either too weak to help or too afraid to get involved. But as Rila stared at the reports of burning colonies and dead children, an old memory surfaced in her mind. Years ago, when she was still a young diplomat learning about the different species in the galaxy, her mentor had told her stories about a race that lived on the edge of known space. A race that had once been the most feared warriors in the galaxy, before they mysteriously disappeared from galactic politics. "Chris," she said suddenly, "bring me the files on all known species in our database. I want to see everything we have on the humans of Terra." Chris looked confused but did as she asked. Within minutes, he had pulled up the sparse files that the Velani government kept on humanity. There wasn't much official information, mostly just trade records and diplomatic notes from their few interactions over the past 30 years. But buried in the older files were intelligence reports from other species, whispered stories and half-remembered legends. The humans had appeared on the galactic stage almost a century ago, spreading out from their home system like a plague of violence and death. Their military was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't just fight wars, they consumed them. They built weapons that could crack planets and ships that could hunt their enemies across entire star systems. Other species learned to fear the sight of human warships because they meant death was coming. But then, about 30 years ago, something changed. The human military seemed to simply vanish overnight. Their warships disappeared from space lanes. Their soldiers went home, and they became traders and explorers instead of conquerors. Most of the galaxy assumed they had grown weak or lost interest in warfare. Some species even mocked them for abandoning their strength. Rila read through report after report, each one painting the same picture. Humans were dangerous beyond imagination. When they chose to be, but they had chosen peace instead. The question was whether they could be convinced to choose violence again. "Ambassador," Kreese said quietly, "you're not seriously thinking about asking the humans for help, are you? Even if the old stories are true, they've been peaceful for decades. They probably don't even have a military anymore." Rayla looked at him with sad eyes. "Kreese, do you have children?" "Yes, Ambassador. 2 daughters." "And if someone came to hurt your daughters, what would you do?" Kreese straightened up, and for a moment his eyes flashed with something hard and dangerous. "I would kill them, Ambassador. I would tear them apart with my bare hands." "Exactly." Rila turned back to the human. "Files. The humans didn't lose their ability to fight, Kreese. They just chose not to use it. But choice can be changed." She pulled up the communication array and began composing a message. Her hands moved slowly across the keyboard as she chose each word carefully. This might be the last hope for her people, and she could not afford to make a mistake. The message was simple and direct. She told the humans about the Korith attacks, about the colonies that had been destroyed, and the millions of innocent people who had died. She described the fear in her people's eyes, and the hopelessness that was spreading through their worlds. Like a disease. She explained that the Villani had no military strength left and no allies who could help them. At the end of the message, she wrote the words that would either save her people or condemn them to die forgotten in the darkness of space. "We are dying. Our children burn in Korith fires. If there is mercy in the galaxy, please help us. We have nowhere else to turn." Rayla sent the message to every human world she could find in their databases, along with similar messages to every other species in the galaxy. She knew most of them would ignore her plea or send meaningless words of sympathy. But maybe, just maybe, somewhere in human space, someone would remember what it felt like to protect the innocent. As the message disappeared into the vast darkness between the stars, Rila could only wait and pray that the legends about humanity were true. Fleet Admiral Kane sat in his small office on Luna Station, staring at the alien message that had just arrived on his personal communication terminal. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago, but he hadn't noticed. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of military service, trembled slightly as he read the desperate plea from the Villani. Ambassador for the 3rd time. Kane was 72 years old and had spent the last 30 years of his life trying to forget what he used to be. Once, he'd been the most feared military commander in human space, the man who planned the campaigns that brought entire star systems to their knees. His strategies had saved humanity from extinction during the border wars, but they had also earned him the nickname, the Butcher of Proxima, after he ordered the complete destruction of an enemy fleet, including their hospital ships. That was the old Kane, the one who believed that victory justified any cost. The new Kane ran cargo schedules and managed trade routes. He helped human merchants find safe passage through dangerous space and settled disputes between colonies. It was peaceful work, good work, and it let him sleep at night without hearing the screams of dying enemies in his dreams. But as he read about burning Villani colonies and murdered children, something deep inside Kane's chest began to burn. The rage he had buried for 3 decades started to claw its way back to the surface, and his hands stopped trembling. He knew that feeling. It was the cold fury that had once made him the most dangerous human alive. Kane picked up his secure communicator and entered a code he hadn't used in 30 years. The device beeped twice, then connected to a network that officially didn't exist anymore. Within seconds, responses started coming in from across human space. Old soldiers who had become farmers, engineers who had become teachers, pilots who had become shopkeepers. All of them answering the same call they had answered decades ago. The first response came from Captain Morgan, who now ran a small shipping company in the outer colonies. Her message was short and to the point. "Admiral, I saw the news feeds about the alien genocide. My cargo ship is already being loaded with supplies. Where do you want me to report?" The second response came from Chief Engineer Torres, who had been teaching at the Luna Technical Academy for the past 15 years. "Sir, I've been keeping an eye on the old fleet specifications. The ships are still there, just sleeping. Give me 48 hours, and I can have the first squadron combat ready." More messages flooded in. Commander Walsh, who had been growing vegetables on Mars. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, who had been running a bar on Europa. Major Kim, who had been working as a doctor on Titan. All of them ready to put down their peaceful lives and pick up their weapons again. Kane stood up from his desk and walked to the window that looked out over the Luna shipyards. In the distance, he could see the dark shapes of the mothball fleet, hundreds of warships that had been decommissioned and put into storage after the last war. They had been sitting there for 30 years, waiting for a day that everyone hoped would never come. But that day had arrived, and Kane could feel the weight of command settling on his shoulders like an old coat. He activated his command console and began issuing orders that would wake the sleeping giant of human military power. "This is Fleet Admiral Kane to all military reserve personnel. Code Black authorization is now in effect. Report to your assigned stations immediately. This is not a drill." Within hours, the quiet corridors of Luna Station filled with the sound of running feet and urgent voices. Men and women who had spent decades in retirement pulled their old uniforms out of closets and storage boxes. The fabric was faded and some of the metals were tarnished, but the people wearing them remembered exactly what they meant. Captain Morgan arrived at the station 12 hours later, still wearing the coveralls she had been wearing when she received Kane's message. She found the Admiral in the main briefing room, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and fleet movements. He looked up when she entered, and she saw something in his eyes that made her straighten her shoulders automatically. "Captain," Kane said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded the respect of entire fleets. "I need you to take the Retribution and get her ready for combat operations. Can you do that?" Morgan nodded without hesitation. The Retribution was a heavy cruiser that had been her command during the border wars. She knew every bolt and wire in that ship, and she had been dreaming about flying her again for 30 years. "Yes, sir. How long do I have?" 72 hours. "The Korath Empire is moving toward the Velani core worlds, and we need to be ready to intercept them." Kane turned back to the star charts. "I want you to handpick your crew from the reserve lists. Only people you trust, people who remember what we're fighting for." As Morgan left to begin her preparations, other officers continued to arrive. Torres came in with grease stains on her hands and a smile on her face, reporting that the first batch of ships would be ready for combat in 2 days. Walsh arrived with a list of pilots who were ready to fly again, many of them grandparents who hadn't touched a fighter cockpit in decades. But the most important arrival came 18 hours after Kane's first message went out. The transport ship carried a single passenger, a thin man in his 60s wearing civilian clothes and thick glasses. Dr. James Park had been the head of human weapons development during the war, the man who had designed the most terrible instruments of destruction in human history. Kane met him at the docking bay personally. "James, I wasn't sure you would come." Park adjusted his glasses and looked around at the bustling activity. "I've been teaching high school chemistry for 20 years. Robert, I thought I was done with all this." He paused and pulled out a datapad showing images from the Velani colonies. But when I saw what the Korith did to those children, I remembered why we built those weapons in the first place. Over the next 2 days, Luna Station transformed from a quiet administrative post into the beating heart of a military machine. Ships that had been dark for decades came online, their reactors humming with power. Weapons that had been sealed away were brought out of storage and tested. Soldiers who had been living peaceful lives packed their belongings and said goodbye to families they might never see again. Kane watched it all from his command center, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had hoped this day would never come, that humanity could remain peaceful forever. But the galaxy had reminded him of an old truth. Sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect the innocent. The Death Fleet was awakening, and soon the Korith Empire would learn why the galaxy had once feared the sight of human warships. The Korith War Commander Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, watching the final moments of another alien world die beneath his feet. The planet's surface glowed orange and red as his fleet's plasma cannons turned cities into lakes of molten glass. This was the 4th Vellani colony his fleet had destroyed in the past week, and each one had been easier than the last. Voss was a massive creature, even by Korith standards. His thick gray skin was covered in ritual scars that told the story of his victories, and his 4 arms each carried a weapon that had tasted the blood of 100 different species. The Korith believed that strength was the only truth in the universe, and Voss had proven his strength by conquering more worlds than any other commander in the Empire's history. "Commander," his aide said, approaching with careful steps. "The Demu." Korith did not tolerate weakness, and showing fear was often a death sentence. "We have destroyed all major population centers on the planet. Should we begin harvesting operations?" Voss waved one of his hands dismissively. "No, there's nothing here worth taking. Let it burn as a message to the other colonies." He turned away from the viewing screen, already bored with the destruction. "Set course for the next system. I want to finish this campaign before the Vellani find the courage to fight back." The aide nodded and began to leave, but stopped when the ship's communication officer called out from his station. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It appears to be from an unknown fleet." Voss walked over to the communication station, his heavy footsteps echoing through the bridge. "Unknown fleet? There are no other military forces in this sector. The Vellani ships are all destroyed." The communication officer, a smaller Korith with nervous eyes, adjusted his equipment. "Sir, the signal is coming from outside the system. Long-range sensors show multiple contacts approaching at high speed." "Put it on screen," Voss ordered. The main viewing screen flickered, and then showed the image of a human male in a dark military uniform. The human looked old, with gray hair and lines around his eyes, but there was something in his expression that made even Voss pay attention. The human's eyes were cold and empty, like looking into the void of space itself. "This is Fleet Admiral Kane of the Terran Defense Force," the human said in a voice that was calm and steady. "You are Korith War Commander Voss, responsible for the destruction of 4 Vellani colonies and the murder of 80 million innocent people. This is your only warning. Surrender now or face the consequences." Voss laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. His crew joined in, their voices mixing into a chorus of mockery. Humans were weak traders and explorers. Everyone knew that. They had not been seen in a military capacity for decades. "Human," Voss said, his voice full of contempt, "you clearly do not understand what you are facing. I command the most powerful fleet in this sector. My ships have destroyed entire civilizations. Your pathetic species should return to your trade routes before I decide to add your worlds to my list of conquests." The human's expression did not change. "You have 30 seconds to begin powering down your weapons and preparing to surrender. After that, we will consider you an active threat to innocent life. Voss cut the transmission and turned to his weapons officer. Prepare all batteries for combat. As soon as these human fools come within range, destroy them. Make sure to leave a few survivors so they can tell their people what happens when they interfere with the Korath Empire. The weapons officer began preparing the ship's massive plasma cannons, the same weapons that had just finished burning a planet. Around them, the rest of the Korath fleet moved into battle formation. 50 warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything the humans had fielded in decades. Voss was confident this would be the shortest battle of his career. But, as the timer counted down from 30 seconds, something impossible happened. The empty space around the Korath fleet suddenly filled with human ships. They appeared without warning, as if they had materialized out of nothing. Sleek black vessels with red markings, moving with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Where did they come from? Voss roared at his sensor operator. I don't know, sir. They weren't there a moment ago. They must have some kind of cloaking. Technology we've never seen before. Voss counted the human ships as they continued to appear around his fleet. 200 vessels, ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts. Each one was painted in colors that seemed to absorb light, making them hard to see against the darkness of space. And on each hull was painted a symbol that made Voss's blood run cold, a human skull with crossed bones beneath it. Open fire! Voss commanded. Destroy them all. The Korath fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt through armor plating, missile launchers that fired warheads the size of buildings, energy weapons that could cut a ship in half. The space between the two fleets lit up like a star as the Korath poured their fury into the human formation, but the human ships moved like nothing Voss had ever seen. They twisted and turned between the Korath fire, their hulls dancing through space as if they were alive. Some of the human ships took hits, but their armor held, and they kept coming. Then the humans returned fire. The weapons that emerged from the human ships were unlike anything in the Korath arsenal. Beams of pure energy that cut through Korath. Armor like paper. Missiles that seemed to think for themselves, dodging defensive fire and striking vital systems with impossible accuracy. And from the largest human ships came something that made Voss's entire fleet shake with terror. The humans called them planet crackers, weapons designed to break worlds apart from the inside. But used against ships, they were even more devastating. The first shot hit the Korath heavy cruiser Skullbreaker, and the entire vessel simply vanished in a flash of light that left nothing behind but expanding gas. Impossible! Voss screamed, watching his fleet being torn apart around him. Our ships are the strongest in the galaxy. But the humans were not just destroying Korath ships, they were hunting them. Every time a Korath vessel tried to retreat, human fighters appeared to cut off their escape. Every time a Korath commander tried to surrender, his transmission was ignored. The humans had not come to negotiate or to show mercy. They had come to end the threat completely. Within 17 minutes, the battle was over. 49 Korath warships had been reduced to burning wreckage, their crews either dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. Only Voss's flagship remained, its engines damaged and its weapons offline. The human admiral appeared on screen again, his cold eyes staring directly at Voss. You murdered children, Commander. You burned worlds full of innocent people. Did you think there would be no consequences? Voss tried to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he felt something he did not recognize: fear. Tell your empire, Kane continued, that humanity remembers how to kill. And we are coming for all of you. General Rex of the Korath High Command sat in the war room deep beneath the surface of Korath Prime, staring at reports that made no sense. In the past 3 weeks, 17 of his battle groups had simply vanished. No distress calls, no final messages, just empty space where proud Korath fleets used to be. The only clues were pieces of wreckage and the few survivors who had been left behind in escape pods, all of them telling the same impossible story. The humans had returned to war. Rex was old enough to remember the stories from the border wars, when human fleets had swept through contested space like a plague of death. But those were just stories, legends told by defeated enemies to explain their failures. The humans of today were peaceful traders who ran cargo ships and explored empty systems. They had given up their warrior ways decades ago, but the evidence was right in front of him. Video recordings from dying Korath ships showed human vessels moving through space like hunting beasts, their black hulls barely visible against the stars. Weapons that no other species possessed, cutting through Korath armor like it was made of paper. And worst of all, the psychological warfare that was spreading terror through every level of the Empire. The humans were not just destroying Korath ships, they were leaving messages burned into the hulls of escape pods. They were broadcasting the death screams of Korath warriors on all military frequencies. They were taking the names of every Korath officer who had participated in the destruction of Villani colonies and hunting them down one by one, no matter where they tried to hide. Rex's personal communicator buzzed, and the voice of his aide came through the speaker. "General, we have another survivor pod requesting rescue. It's from Battle Group 7. Battle Group 7? Rex stood up from his chair, his face going pale. Battle Group 7 had been commanded by his own nephew, War Commander Drac. Bring the survivor to me immediately. 20 minutes later, a single Korath soldier was brought into the war room. His armor was burned and twisted, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen the impossible. Rex recognized him as Lieutenant Cole, one of Drac's most trusted officers. "Lieutenant," Rex said, trying to keep his voice steady, "what happened to Battle Group 7? Cole's voice shook as he spoke. "They came out of nowhere, General. One moment, we were patrolling the outer system. The next moment, we were surrounded by human ships. War Commander Drac ordered all vessels to attack, but our weapons couldn't touch them. They moved like ghosts through our fire. And my nephew?" Cole closed his eyes, and Rex could see tears running down the soldier's face. "The humans targeted his ship first, General. They didn't destroy it quickly like the others. They cut it apart piece by piece, broadcasting his screams on all frequencies so the entire fleet could hear him die. They wanted us to know what fear felt like." Rex felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Korath had always been the ones who brought fear to other species. They were the predators, the conquerors, the ones who made entire civilizations tremble at the mention of their name. But now something was hunting them, and it was more terrifying than anything they had ever faced. How many ships escaped? None. "General, I'm the only survivor because they wanted me to bring you a message." Cole reached into his armor and pulled out a small data chip. "They said to tell you that every Korath who participated in the genocide of the Villani colonies will be hunted down and killed. No exceptions, no mercy." Rex took the data chip with trembling hands and inserted it into his personal computer. The screen lit up with an image that made his blood run cold. It was a list of names, thousands of them. Every Korath officer and soldier who had taken part in the destruction of Villani worlds. His own name was at the top of the list, marked with a red symbol that looked like a human skull dot at the bottom. Of the list was a message in simple text. "We know who you are. We know where you are. We are coming." Rex stared at the screen for a long moment, then activated his emergency communication system. Within minutes, he was connected to Supreme Commander Zar, the military leader of the entire Korath Empire. The old warrior's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "Rex, I've been reading your reports. How bad is the situation?" "Supreme Commander, we're facing something we've never encountered before. The humans aren't just fighting a war, they're conducting an extermination campaign. They have weapons we can't defend against, tactics we can't predict, and a level of coordination that suggests they've been planning this for years. Zar's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me that a species of peaceful traders has managed to destroy our most powerful fleets?" "Sir, I don't think they were ever peaceful. I think they were just sleeping." Rex pulled up tactical displays showing the human attack patterns. "Look at this data. Every engagement follows the same pattern. They appear without warning, destroy our forces with minimal losses, and disappear before reinforcements can arrive. This isn't the work of merchants who picked up weapons. This is professional military doctrine at its finest." On the screen, Zar was quiet for a long moment. Rex could see the wheels turning in the old commander's mind as he processed the implications. The Korath Empire had built its power on the assumption that they were the strongest military force in the galaxy. If that assumption was wrong, everything they had built could come crashing down. "What do you recommend?" Zar asked finally. "We need to recall all fleets to defend our core worlds. The humans are systematically hunting down every ship and commander involved in the Vellani campaign. If we leave our forces scattered, they'll pick us off one by one." But even as Rex spoke, he knew it was too late. Reports were coming in from across Korath space. Human strike forces were appearing in systems that should have been impossible for them to reach. Supply convoys were vanishing without a trace. Military bases were being destroyed by weapons that seemed to strike from empty space. The worst part was the psychological effect on Korath forces. Warriors who had never known fear were abandoning their posts. Ship commanders were refusing orders to patrol dangerous sectors. The humans had done something that no enemy had ever managed to do. They had broken the spirit of the Korath military. Rex's communication board lit up with incoming messages. More survivor reports, more destroyed fleets, more impossible victories by an enemy that should not have existed. And with each report came the same message burned into the hulls of escape pods. For New Haven. "General," Cole said quietly, "there's something else the humans told me to tell you." Rex looked at the terrified soldier. "What?" "They said that this is just the beginning. They said that every species in the galaxy is watching to see what happens when someone commits genocide. They want to make sure that no one ever makes the same mistake the Korath Empire made." Rex understood then what the humans were doing. This wasn't just about revenge for the Vellani colonies. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. The humans were showing every species what happened when you crossed certain lines. When you decided that innocent life had no value, and the message was clear. There were still monsters in the galaxy, but they only hunted other monsters. Supreme Commander Zar stood on the highest tower of Korath Prime, watching the stars with eyes that had lost all their fire. In the distance, he could see the orbital defense platforms that had protected his homeworld for over a century. Massive weapons designed to destroy entire fleets, powered by the planet's core and operated by the best warriors in the Empire. They were supposed to make Korath Prime unconquerable, but Zar knew they would not be enough that the human death fleet had appeared. At the edge of the system 3 hours ago, moving in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. 200 black ships, each one painted with the skull symbol that had become the nightmare of every Korath warrior. They had not attacked immediately, had not demanded surrender, had not even tried to communicate. They had simply stopped just outside weapons range and waited. The waiting was the worst part. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, and every hour felt like a lifetime. Zar's military commanders were calling constantly, asking for orders, but what orders could he give? Fight an enemy that had destroyed their entire fleet? Run from warriors who could appear anywhere in the galaxy? Hide on a planet that had nowhere left to hide? Zar's personal aide, a young Korath named Locke, approached carefully. The old commander had not spoken to anyone in hours, and his silence was more frightening than any rage could have been. "Supreme Commander," Locke said quietly, "the planetary defense grid is fully charged and ready. The remaining fleet commanders are requesting permission to engage the human forces. Zar did not turn around. How many ships do we have left, Locke? 43 vessels, sir. They're not all in the best condition, but the crews are ready to fight. 43 ships. Zar's voice was hollow and empty. Against 200 human warships that have already proven they can destroy our best forces without breaking a sweat. He finally turned to face his aide, and Locke stepped back at the look in his commander's eyes. Tell me, Locke, what do you think will happen if we fight them? Locke swallowed hard. He was young and had never seen real combat, but he was not stupid. We will lose, sir. Yes, we will lose. And when we lose, what will the humans do to our planet? The young Korath looked out at the city below them, where millions of his people lived and worked and raised their children. I don't know, sir. Before Zar could answer, the communication system crackled to life. The same human voice that had been haunting Korath nightmares for weeks filled the air, calm and steady and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. This is Fleet Admiral Kane to the leadership of Korath Prime. Your empire ends today, but your people can live. You have 1 hour to decide. Zar walked to the communication console and activated the reply function. He had to try one last time. To save his people, even if it meant destroying everything he had spent his life building. Human Admiral, Zar said, I am Supreme Commander Zar of the Korath Empire. I want to understand what you are offering. There was a pause, then Kane's voice came back. You will surrender unconditionally. You will order all Korath military forces to stand down immediately. You will allow human forces to occupy your worlds and dismantle your war machine. In return, your civilian population will be protected and your species will be allowed to survive. And if we refuse? Another pause, longer this time. Then we will do what is necessary to ensure that the Korath Empire can never again commit genocide. Your choice, Commander. Zar closed his eyes and thought about all the worlds his people had conquered, all the species they had destroyed, all the innocent lives they had taken in their hunger for power. The humans were offering something no Korath had ever offered. To a defeated enemy, mercy. Admiral Kane, Zar said finally, I need to know something. If our positions were reversed, if my people had come to your worlds and murdered your children, what would you have done? The same thing we're doing now, Kane replied without hesitation. We would have hunted you down and destroyed you completely. The only difference is that we would not have offered you a choice. Zar understood then what he was dealing with. The humans were not conquerors seeking territory or resources. They were executioners carrying out justice. They had come not to rule the Korath, but to stop them from ever hurting anyone again. I accept your terms, Zar said, and felt something break inside his chest as he spoke the words. I order all Korath forces to stand down and prepare for human occupation. Within hours, human ships began landing on Korath Prime, but they were not the warships that had terrorized the Empire's fleets. These were smaller vessels carrying engineers and doctors, teachers and administrators. The humans had come prepared, not just to destroy the Korath war machine, but to rebuild Korath society. Admiral Kane himself came down to the planet's surface, and Zar met him in the ruins of what had once been the Empire's military headquarters. The human was older than Zar had expected, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much war. But there was still steel in his voice when he spoke. Commander Zar, your military bases are being destroyed as we speak. Your weapons factories will be dismantled and converted to produce civilian goods. Your warships will be scrapped or converted to cargo vessels. The Korath Empire as a military force is finished. Zar nodded, watching through the windows as human engineers began tearing down the symbols of Korath power. And my people? Your people will be given a choice. They can continue to live as they always have, but they will live in peace. No more conquest, no more genocide, No more treating other species as prey to be hunted. Kane's expression softened slightly. We're not here to destroy the Korath as a species commander. We're here to teach you how to be neighbors instead of monsters. Over the following weeks, Zar watched his empire transform into something he barely recognized. The humans worked with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural, dismantling military installations while building schools and hospitals. They brought Korath children books instead of weapons, taught them art instead of warfare, showed them that strength could be used to protect rather than destroy. The most surprising thing was how quickly many of his people adapted to the new way of life. Young Korath, who had been raised to believe that might made right, began to question the old ways when they saw how the humans treated even their defeated enemies with dignity and respect. Months later, Zar received a message from Ambassador Rila of the Vellani Federation. She was coming to Korath Prime to help establish a new government, one that would focus on trade and cooperation instead of conquest and destruction. The idea of a Vellani working alongside Korath would have been impossible before the humans arrived. But now it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. As Zar read the message, he realized that the humans had accomplished something truly remarkable. They had not just defeated the Korath Empire, they had shown the galaxy that there was another way to live. That strength could be used to protect the weak instead of preying on them. That the strong had a responsibility to care for those who could not care for themselves. The Death Fleet had returned to human space, their ships once again going dark. But the galaxy would never forget what they had done. They had proven that evil actions would have consequences, that there were still those who would stand up for the innocent, no matter the cost. And somewhere in the vastness of space, other species who might have been tempted to follow the Korath path looked at the ruins of the Empire and decided that perhaps peace was a better choice after all.